Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit. I'm Lisa Bunnies, your host, and my guest for this session is Dr. Lotte Valentine. Our topic today is how to heal yourself by understanding your ancestral lineage. Dr. Lotte Valentine has had 2 near-death out-of-body experiences, which resulted in her becoming clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and activating her life path to become a physician, author, evidential psychic medium, medical medium, ancestral healer, and international keynote speaker. She's described as an oracle who has the ability to touch the heights and move into the power of the mystic, prophet, and seer. And she's here with us today. I so enjoy our time together. Dr. Lotte, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I always so enjoy our conversations because you've got, well, as I just mentioned, you've got so many tools in your toolkit. So since this is the Ancestral Healing Summit, let's dive in there. In your experience, what is ancestral healing and how did you get interested in this specific kind of work?
I know, I think it's absolutely fascinating. The ancestral healing has to do with the unresolved trauma and issues, experiences of our ancestors. And it's that anything that has been unresolved gets passed down to the next generation. So when you look at it, it's the experiences, the behavioral patterns of that they had during their life. So if they had traumatic experiences, many times you think back to your childhood and you might have been at that Christmas table and you say, ask a question and you say, why don't we ever talk about Uncle Bobby? And your mother turns to you and says, shh, we don't talk about Uncle Bobby. Well, if you have had any experience like that, you know that there's these traumatic experiences that are hidden within the family system. So when you work with ancestral healing, you work with, people come to me or go online and they start researching the issues that they're experiencing. So, for example, somebody may have problems with relationship issues, or they might have a difficult stepping into themselves, taking on the full power. They may feel unnurtured or lonely and unsupported in life. And when you start looking at the patterns, you first have to look at that person. Well, did this person have any kind of traumatic experiences themselves that caused them to maybe have a fear of sirens, for example? But if they have not experienced any trauma and they don't really understand why they're feeling unnurtured or lonely or problems with relationships, could be almost anything, that's when you start looking at the ancestors and you look at what happened to mom and dad, your uncles, your aunts, your grandma, your grandpa, and anybody else within the family system. But it can even be people that were not part of your immediate family, but they may have been an employee that worked many, many years for your grandfather, or it might be a really close friend to the family, or an ex-wife. It could, come from other family lineages, because when we live our life, we are energetic beings, so we are connected to other people, what I call the invisible grid, because we are energies. We're connected through the quantum field or the collective consciousness. But we're also connected via DNA. So we have 50% of mom's DNA, 50% of dad's DNA. And we know now from research that these traumatic experiences that many of our grandparents had, many of them were in World War II or may have been in other wars. And that created a lot of trauma and traumatic experiences. And so what happens is these survivors of these terrible wars, they go on then to have families, and then they have grandchildren. And we know from research now that we pass down these traumas on the DNA. And even it's gotten as far as, so we know that the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have a different gene expression. And there's certain genes that get triggered. So there are different studies that have been done on that, Holocaust survivors and the methylation of the FKBP5 gene. And we can see that trauma is actually passed down through the generations. So when somebody has an experience or, have a fear or any kind of problem or issue that they can't really put their thumb on, many times that is what's coming from your ancestors. And so it's been passed down. So how did I get involved in all this ancestral healing? So like you mentioned, I had 2 near-death experiences, and then that was in 1992 and 1994. Then I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and I started to hear the spirit world. And that started the day after my first NDE while I was still in the hospital. And then it just grew and grew. So this has been, over 25 years now that I've been hearing the spirit world. So now I work with the spirit world, and I was guided to go to medical school. So I went to medical school and I was 54. And then as soon as I graduated in 2016, I was guided to go to Arthur Findlay College in England, which is a famous college for psychic sciences, and became an evidential psychic medium. So after that, so now I'm a psychic medium and I'm a physician, and I divide my time between working as a physician and working spiritually with clients. And so I was doing a mediumship reading for a client, and I could see the patterns. And it was, I told the client, I said, I see your grandmother, and she was married. Your grandfather was physically abusive towards her. And I see your mother, she's one of 3 kids, and your grandfather also was physically abusive towards them. And then your mother got married and she married your father, and your father was also physically abusive towards your mother and towards you. And I had 3 or 4 readings in a row that kept repeating. That pattern was the same with each client. And it's at the point when you're thinking, am I still talking to the spirit I talked to yesterday? No, this is a different person, because I get images, so I can see how what the image looks like, or that person looks like, or how they actually show themselves to us from the spirit world. Because sometimes they show themselves the way they looked when they were passing away, but sometimes they show themselves when they were younger. But the images I would see would be a different image. So I know it was a different spirit, but the message was the same. It was that repetitive pattern of trauma and abuse within the family system. And so then I became really interested because the spirit world had been speaking to me now for over 25 years. So it's like they're giving me messages. So I said, well, what is this? Why is this pattern the same? Why am I getting the same readings? There's something to this. So then I was stumbled upon Ancestral Healing Counseling by Mark Willin, who is kind of the father of ancestral healing. He wrote the book, It Didn't Start With You. And of course, the training, was going to be within 2 weeks or something, and it was coming up really soon. I stumbled upon the training, and I had known about him for a long time. I had known about him and his book, but the training never worked with my schedule. And that week, the training showed up and it worked with my schedule. It was online. It was during the pandemic. And so I went through, this couple of months of training with other physicians and counselors from all around the world. And we learned how to look at these different patterns. So when I work now with people to help them resolve whatever issue it is that they can't quite put their thumb on, and it can be, like I said, anything. It could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be relationship issues, feeling hopeless, lonely, OCD, anxiety. It could be almost anything, but it doesn't make sense why they have this experience based on their own life. So I'm saying it's coming from somewhere else. And so now it's become this integration. So I use the different tools that I've learned going through medical school and the counseling we learn in medical school, combined with this ancestral healing counseling, combined with mediumship, and combined with my shamanic training. So I merge all those different tools together when I work with people to help tailor a specific protocol to help them access what it is that's causing the problem or issue for them. So it is absolutely fascinating. And I love working with people this way, because once you understand, or once you can see why you're having a relationship problem, for example, Why is it that you're not feeling nurtured in your relationship? There could be many different reasons, but once they understand it, once they see that pattern and they can understand, oh my gosh, now I see it. It's that aha moment. The light bulb goes off in their head and they say, I see it. Now I understand. And it's like the problem just evaporates. It just, we do a healing around it. We create healing for the ancestors and for that person during that session to help create that equilibrium, because we are energy, and it's an energetic frequency, if you so will, that now we overcome that frequency. And so we sort of null it. Think of noise canceling headphones. And once you see it, it's not a problem anymore, because you know what's caused that. And now you can just give it away, and then create healing for that. And we create healing going back in time to the ancestors, and for that person, for their family, and any offspring that may come after them. So it's a beautiful thing to do for yourself and your family and your loved ones, because the people that step up to this plate and take on the journey of creating healing for themselves and for the ancestors, it becomes a ripple effect almost through the whole family lineage, because you change. And once you change and you see the problem, your energy changes, right? So once you change that energy, you are also affecting other people around you, because you change that energy loop that we're stuck in. I look at it as think of rings that are sort of tied together like a long chain, and they're energetic loops. That's just how I see it in my mind when I work. So who knows if there's any truth or physics to it all, but that's what I see in images, and I see the loops of energy that's sort of tied together, and that sort of comes apart, and it just becomes free. It's almost it's almost like we have shackles or chains. We're shackled to our ancestors in a certain way, because we are connected to them whether we like it or not. We come from our family, we carry that DNA, we're in physical form now, but we are also connected energetically. We're connected physically and energetically to our ancestors. And so it's no wonder we take on things that are unresolved. It's whatever ticket they had that they could not resolve. I tell my clients that ticket is now in your bucket. You carry the bucket with ticket, 325 or whatever that problem, whatever number that problem has. That ticket is now in your bucket, but if you can resolve it, you rip up that ticket and the problem is gone. But if you don't resolve it, whoever comes after you, your own children, your nieces, your nephews, whoever are born after, that ticket is going to go to one of them. So we don't always know where the problems are coming from. And sometimes you have to be a little bit of a Sherlock Holmes to untangle the history of the family, because sometimes it can even come from a miscarriage that your mother had before you were born. For example, she had a miscarriage. You might not even have known about it until you were an adult. But even that unborn baby can then pass on trauma and, feeling unloved or unsupported. But that can come from many different issues, depending on how you what experiences your ancestors had and what experiences you're having.
Yeah. Wow. So much to chew on here. I do want to ask a lot of questions, but what's foremost in my mind is you're saying that by discovering the pattern, the event, the trauma, whatever the origin of something that we are carrying with us, it can dissolve. Do you ever see that it doesn't, that we actually need to do more work, or is it is it usually just knowing that something happened that allows it to sort of evaporate? What's your experience with that?
I would say that things get better as soon as the client understands what it is or how it came to be a problem in the first place. Once they see that pattern, that light bulb goes off, that aha moment comes on. And once they see it, the issue isn't there. But now you can have different issues. You can even you can inherit disease too, right? So I have clients, mom had breast cancer at age 40, client gets breast cancer at age 40. And the father died when mother was 42, daughter gets divorced when she was 42, man leaves, right? And so you get these patterns of things happen at the exact same age, but it can even be disease. And I've seen it several times how the disease repeats itself, and it's diseases that not necessarily don't have any genetic component. It's not a disease that you inherit. We don't have at least we don't have the gene codes for it. But a lot of our diseases come from the subconscious mind. So we do know from research that there are certain people that tend to get certain diseases, like people who get ALS, people who are familiar with the work of Gabor Mate. He's written several books. And in one of his books, he talks about how people who get ALS are typically the nicest people. And he said it was almost a joke in his book. He mentioned then how these people are always so nice and they don't want to create conflict. They are always doing things for everybody else. And for some reason, that personality tends to get ALS. But in his book, you can also read about different ones. Breast cancer, women tend to stuff their feelings down and they suppress their own emotions. And it's almost like we put the lid on, right? And it's like we just press it down into our breasts. But, does everybody get breast cancer? Do you have to have that personality? Of course not. But in his book, he mentions they did a study and they came up with a questionnaire of asking the clients before they had a biopsy what their personality was like, and they could predict, I think it was up to something like 90%, the people that were going to be positive for cancer versus having a negative biopsy. So looking at these types of studies, it's fascinating, right? Because we know that the subconscious mind adjusts when we're young children. We learn to cope. We have these coping mechanisms. So when you look at it ancestrally, if you had a mother who was very loving, so I'm not going to go with the abusive one. I'm just going to go with a loving mother. The mother is very loving, very supportive. Person says, I couldn't have a better mother. She was great. But then when you start untangling the problem, and this person says, well, I never feel supported by my partner. Well, the truth is that when you start untangling and you look at that behavior that child learned towards the mother, if you did the right things and you pleased your mother, you had good grades in school. So for women, typically in my generation, you were a good little girl, you were quiet, you didn't speak back to mother, you were polite to everybody, you sort of sacrificed your own identity to please other people, because that was, at least for my generation. So I'm 64 now. And so when I grew up, it was very much like that. In Sweden, where I grew up, so I can't speak for other nations, but my generation, it was very much like that. And when you look at that behavior that we learn at that young age, so we grow up knowing, or we're taught to be a people pleaser. So then we grow up, then we become people pleasers, and we extend ourselves to other people all the time. But then we can't get that nurturing feeling back from our husband or partner, because it's based on the approval of the mother in the first place. You're the good little girl, you're doing this, you're doing that. And so we're not getting that anymore from the partner, because partnership is supposed to be 50-50. But the people pleaser kind of overwhelms the other person, because the people pleaser also typically is not a very good receiver. And so their relationship goes down the tubes eventually. So it's fascinating, because all these patterns that we learn when we're young children, and it's just a pattern of coping mechanisms, but they're subconscious. But we do this with everything. So these little girls, for example, that weren't allowed to speak their feelings, they weren't allowed to have tantrums. Little girls, are nice and quiet and don't speak back. And then they grow up and then they get breast cancer, and they're still doing that same thing. And so they're constantly suppressing their emotions. So do we give ourselves breast cancer or ALS or any other disease? No, of course not. We don't do this on purpose, right? It's a learned behavior from childhood. But that's why when you're working with ancestral healing and you can untangle that, not only do you get, the feeling of freedom, of understanding, oh my, now I see why I'm having relationship issues, or now I see why I'm having difficulty stepping into my own power. So once you understand that, there is this mental relief that you have the ability to see it clearly of why you're having problems. But also that has, it's tied into the physical manifestation of disease itself, because we know that, all our different cranial nerves, and people who are familiar with polyvagal theory and Stephen Porges' work, that is a bundle, it's like a coax cable of nerves that regulates a lot of things. And that trauma, when you look back at your childhood, even if it wasn't traumatic and you were just a good little girl, you're still having issues that need to be resolved, because many of these women haven't been able to see the picture, or don't understand why they're not happy in their relationships. So it goes into it's mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and it's all tied together at different levels. So that's why I really, I love working with ancestral healing, because it has such a big effect on people. It has the potential of really changing and creating healing in many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for diving in there. That was really illuminating. In fact, it brings up, you and I are similarly aged, and I was raised in pretty much the same way. You shush, you don't talk back to grownups. In fact, children are seen and not heard, etc. And I think it's interesting that the current generation of parents are, I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to be in any way judgmental, but I'm, using reactionary language that I've been taught, that parents these days are allowing their children to just sort of, say and do whatever they want. And so those of us in this age look at these children as these horrendous little misbehaving brats, and we get so angry at how these children are not behaving the way they're supposed to be. And so that brings up all of this, I don't know, it brings up a lot within, and I know I'm not the only one. I've got friends, we share these stories where we're trying to, like, oh, what a cute kid. Oh, I wouldn't have been allowed to behave like that. And so the next generation it almost seems like it's a boomeranging thing, where we were so closed in and now they're so out of control. Are you in agreement that that's sort of I don't even know how to ask this question. Do you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. And there is it's almost like the rebelling against the confinement of our generation, how we were just kind of squished, always makes me think of the Muppets on Sesame Street. Is it the one that's in the garbage can, and you press the little lid on it? It's a Cookie Monster.
Oscar the Grouch.
Oscar the Grouch. It always makes me think of that, when the kids were literally like, you're pushed down into that little garbage can. But absolutely. So when you look at the next generation and the way they're raising their kids is very different from the way we were raised. And it's going to raise, like you said, all these issues within ourselves that, because that's how we were taught, but it's actually healthy for the child to have a tantrum. It's healthy for the child to show their emotions, because it's when we squash them and tell them to be quiet, that's, I think we cause more harm. So it is an adjustment, for our generation, but each generation, we have to remember, typically brings us forward. We brought our parents' generation forward, and we look back on our parents and the way, they thought, were trying to give us guidance when I raised my own children. And my parents were, great parents. My in-laws were great parents. The way we look at it. But of course, again, I was raised like the good little girl, and it wasn't until I really studied the ancestral healing part that I started to realize how this good behavior had really affected me and who I had become. And then you have to untangle all that thread. So every time you do something or say something, or, you start thinking, wait, where is this coming from? Is this another pattern that I inherited? And I'm just doing the same thing that my mom was taught. And that's just how it is. Each generation, we teach our children what we were taught ourselves. or our adopted children, you know what I'm saying, or the next generation, if you're just a caretaker. But that pattern, whatever we were taught, gets passed down. So when you look at the behavior within the family system, the father is an alcoholic, then he has a daughter, let's say he has a son and a daughter, and then the daughter rejects the father because he's an alcoholic, and because she is rejecting that behavior, she doesn't like the way that the father treats the mother. She doesn't like the way he's drinking. But then when she meets a partner, she marries almost the identical person to her father. And so she repeats that pattern, right? And we see this all the time, right? The trauma sort of continues down the line. That is what she's familiar with. Was her upbringing. That was her environment. But not only that, because whenever you reject a behavior from someone, so she rejects the father, you know that it's going to come back, because whenever you reject, you invite it back in. But that is what we do as children when we grow up and we see something. It doesn't even have to be something traumatic. It could be the way dad was always working. He was a workaholic, or he wasn't a good listener. He never heard what my mom said. Whatever it is that you reject. So if you had a dad like that, you reject that. Guess what? You probably married a workaholic or somebody who's not a good listener. And it is because the pattern is going to repeat itself until it's healed. And so it keeps coming back into the family in different ways so that we can create healing for that. And so when people seek me out, I always tell them that, they're amazing for taking this step, because they are creating healing for themselves and for their whole family at the same time. So it is just breaking those patterns of behavior.
Yeah. And I like that we're talking about just things that we just recognize, or maybe we don't even recognize, because this is just the way life is. This is what my parents were. This is the way my family is. And we don't sometimes realize that this is a pattern that goes back generations. Every generation heals a little bit, because, we're learning a little bit more about psychology. I mean, Wayne Dyer, appeared when I was in my teens, et cetera. So we're gradually working these things through. So I think sometimes we sort of take it for granted that this is just the evolution of, consciousness, et cetera. But it really does begin, in generations past.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about how can we get beyond looking at these patterns as that's just the way it is, and recognizing that this is something that we can genuinely heal.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. How do we recognize it? I think it takes somebody to really come to a point in our life when they say, this is not working. I don't know what it is. My relationship is not working. I'm unhappy in my marriage, or I'm unhappy in my work. I want this other job, but I can't seem to figure out how to step into myself so I can actually get that job. But I know I'm better than all the other people that are trying to get this job, and I have more experience, and right. So you have to work through, and it's not until somebody realizes that there is a problem, right? That's the first aha moment is, oh, this is not working, or I'm having problems. I'm having issues with this. And then you have to then, untangle where that is coming from. What was the experience of your parents? What was the experience of the grandparents? Because if you had a mother, for example, when you think back to the father, the alcoholic father, for example, first, so you reject it and it comes back into your life, but you also do something else. It's called like alignment or merging with the mother, because the mother was not happy in that relationship. And so subconsciously, as a young child, you say, I love you so much, Mom. Don't worry, I'm gonna help you with this. I'm going to help you carry part of this burden. And so there is an alignment. Whenever you have an alignment, there's like a repetition that happens. You are then going to have the same experiences as the person you aligned with. So in that example, you would align with the mother, you reject the father and align with the mother. So there's actually two things going on at the same time. But many times when people have a hard time stepping into themselves, for example, it can be that the mother wasn't able to step into themselves. The mother had a self-confidence problem. And so you align with the mother to have the same experience that the mother had. And so she didn't have any confidence to step into herself. Now you don't have any confidence to step into yourself. Or it could be that you have what's called a break in the mother bond. And so you could have, your mother might have been busy when you were a child. There was a lot of siblings. Maybe you're the sixth or the seventh child. So there wasn't much time for you to be mothered by mother. You were mothered maybe by the older siblings or a grandparent. Maybe the mom had to return to work very soon after your birth, and you were with a nanny or another caretaker a lot during the day. You could have been hospitalized when you were an infant. The mother was hospitalized. You had a difficult birth, and there's all these different scenarios that creates what we call a break in the bond. And so that break in the bond, with the mother, so you're not getting the nurturing and the love and the care that you needed as this little tiny infant. But so because you're not receiving that energy or that caring as you're an infant, so you're already putting up your guards because you're not getting the nurturing that you need. But then what happens later in life, because you're an infant, you're already laying down the patterns of how to cope with all these different patterns and experiences that you have. So then when you get older, you have a hard time stepping into yourself. You don't feel supported. You feel hopeless. You feel lonely. Nobody understands you. And that might actually go all the way back to that early infancy. And it could even be, like I said, a traumatic birth. So sometimes, it's the problems it could be a similar problem, but it could be coming from not aligning with a mother or aligning with grandmother or an aunt in the family. It could be a traumatic experience by an uncle before you were even born, and then you're aligning with the grandmother for her heartbreak. Maybe that uncle passed away and nobody even talks about him. You don't know what happens. Maybe they didn't have enough food. That uncle was starving and he passed away. And now you're merging with the grief of that grandmother, that she lost that child at a young age, but you're not even aware of it. Or you might just have like, oh yeah, I did have an uncle that passed away. But you're not seeing the correlation of your grief that has sort of been passed down. So I'm saying, so this is this invisible grid or entanglement, quantum entanglement, whatever you want to call it. But we are all connected to each other energetically. And so the problems that we experience can come from almost anywhere within the family system. Anybody who has been part of the family system in some way or another, dad's ex-wife, right? She's not part of the family system. She didn't give birth to you, but she's part of the traumatic experience experienced by your father. You're entangled with your father, but you're also entangled with that ex-wife that you maybe have never even met. So I'm saying, so sometimes it's difficult to see until you start to untangle the problem and dissect it and say, okay, what is the problem and where is it coming from? Who had one of these types of experiences? Did anybody was anybody in war? Did anybody have a traumatic event happen? Did anybody have a lot of grief in the family? So depending on, what that problem is or the issue for the client. So you have to sort of dig a little bit in your ancestors. And sometimes people don't have clear memories of, traumatic experiences in their childhood. And I've had people say, I have no memories from until I was about 12. But the fascinating part in that is that because I'm a medium, many times the person that was the wrongdoer in their childhood, maybe, dad or grandpa or mom, anybody, when they have been in the spirit world, they have come through and shown me images of what happened. And then say, have anybody ever told you that it was like this? Yes, that's true. And, I'll see in a lot of beer bottles or empty wine bottles. And I see a little kid opening the fridge. There's no food. people are passed out, nobody's caring for that child. And I know it's their spirit world is showing me the traumatic event that that person experienced. So it's absolutely fascinating because it's become this merging of mediumship and my formal training has become integrated into one piece of ancestral healing.
Yeah. Wow, that's really fascinating because I know many people who don't have memories of their childhood, and it's interesting to hear that that's one way of discovering either why the memories are missing and what they are. So let's just carry on the example that you were just giving, you're working with somebody who doesn't remember their childhood, and it's because of the scenario you were describing, everybody was passed out drunk, there's no food in the house, the child isn't cared for, etc. Is recognizing this, as we were saying earlier, when you bring this forward and the person now, oh, right, yes, now it's coming back to me. Is that enough to dissolve this? Or does something that traumatic need therapy? I mean, I guess it would be an individual case by case basis.
Yes. Many times the people that show up, they're either already in therapy or they've done therapy if they have a traumatic childhood like that, but they're still saying, I think it's something ancestral. I think it's something that I'm not seeing. But once you see it, for whatever problem that person is experiencing, or maybe they're saying, I don't understand, I'm on my third marriage, and they're always an alcoholic, they're always having drug issues, and I married the next one, and the pattern is repeating, and they can already see it's repeating, but they don't understand why. And then you can, once you see it, and they understand that, oh, we do this subconsciously, we invite it back in so that we can create healing for it. And so then once you see that you can create healing for that, and people go on and say, wow, I just didn't see the pattern, but now I understand why I'm on my third marriage, and it's the same thing every time. So it's, many times it's like that, and it can be, almost anything. It doesn't even have to be a traumatic event. It could be, I'm just don't feel supported. I don't feel seen and heard, right? It could be anything, or my kids don't understand me. So that's another one. Well, now you got to go back up to the grandparents and the parents and the kids. And what is it what is that problem? And then when you look at the parents and the grandparents, you already see the connection, and the pattern is just a pattern that's repeating. Yeah. So it's just a matter of seeing the pattern to create healing for it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I realize I'm asking sort of difficult questions to answer, but this is a really unique conversation that we're having, and I really appreciate your allowing me to, sort of go off the rails here a little bit. I'm wondering, I think that people are probably wondering, how can I work with Dr. Lotte? Because what you're talking about is so very fascinating. Does it have to be in person, or can people work with you virtually? How does that work?
Yeah, I actually work with everybody virtually. So people go to my website, drlotte.com, or they can go to Divine Spiritual Essence. Now, the two websites are linked, but if you just go to Dr. Lotte, it's easier to remember, drlotte.com. And it says, work spiritually with Dr. Lotte. And you click on that, you'll see a whole menu come up. And one of the things is ancestral healing. So it's easy to find me. I developed a product for HemiSync, if you're familiar with HemiSync, and that was released last summer, and that is about healing the ancestral mother wound. And that's also a good starting place for people who can't afford it, financially, to work with me one-on-one. That is a great way, great starting point as well. And I think it's, $25 to $30. So, but that will give you a lot of tips, and it's kind of a meditative journey, but it also has worksheets, so people can untangle a lot of things themselves.
All right, perfect, wonderful. Thank you for that. And let me go ahead and mention that website again. It's drlotte.com, DRLOTTE. There's no period after DR. drlotte.com. And wow, thank you again for being with us today. This has been so very interesting. And again, I appreciate you allowing me to just go wherever the conversation takes us. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to make sure that we talk about, or do you feel like we've covered it?
I think we're good. I mean, if people want more information, they can, just go to my website, and there is different articles that you can click on, different research that has been done that people can look up and get a deeper knowledge about ancestral healing as well.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again, Dr. Lotte. Again, fascinating conversation. I so appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I want to remind everyone I've been talking with Dr. Lotte Valentine, and I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Ancestral Healing Summit.